So that's the hardware on the cluster. When you're accessing Palmetto, you'll be accessing it in generally two ways. You'll be connecting through a secure shell client to modify files and to issue commands. To submit jobs and things like that. If you need to move a lot of data either to the cluster or from the cluster, then you'll probably be using a file transfer client like FileZilla. FileZilla is a really nice file transfer client, and it's available for all platforms. Of course, in addition to that, if you're familiar with command line tools like Secure Copy or SFTP, you can certainly use those as well. All right, so now's the time when we need to log into the Palmetto cluster. For Windows users, if you've downloaded and installed that secure shell client, when you start it up, this is how you will connect to the cluster. You'll click on the Quick Connect button, and then you'll enter the host name of the cluster, which is user.palmetto.clemson.edu, and then your username. If you have a Palmetto account already, of course, you'll use your Palmetto account username, and that's just your Clemson username, and it's going to be the same password as well. Your Clemson network username and password are going to be the same whether you're logging into the library or logging into the Palmetto cluster. If you don't have a Palmetto cluster account, then you're welcome to use one of our guest accounts. Those guest accounts, the usernames look like this. It's HPC guest followed by some number ranging between 20 and 80. So some number between 20 and 80. In this example image in the slide, I'm using HPC guest 45 to log in. The password for those guest accounts is HPCCU 2013. It's the same password for all of the guest accounts. If you're connecting from a Mac or a Linux system, you'll be connecting in the same way that I'm about to. So just watch what I'm doing here. I'm going to launch a terminal window, and I'm going to connect to the cluster like this. SSH, my username at user.palmetto.clemson.edu. And of course, I'll enter my password. And there, I'm connected to the Palmetto cluster. Now, when you first log into the Palmetto cluster, you're going to see this long message. This is called the message of the day, and it's actually just a text file. It's located here, and you can read that or reread it anytime you want to. And it's a very useful thing to make note of. First of all, if you have any problems with anything to do with the Palmetto cluster, you can receive help by contacting us at ithelp@clemson.edu with the word Palmetto anywhere in the subject line of that email. Of course, we have maintenance on the first Tuesday of every month. It typically falls between 9 a.m. and 12 noon. There's a lot of useful information here. The user guide, of course, is located here. And there are some sample programs available here. And of course, you can use these links to check on the cluster status and the current load on the cluster. Now, here is some very useful information. These are some useful commands. In particular, to check the detailed status of a job, you can use qstat-xf followed by the job ID number for your job. I'll talk about in detail what all these things mean in a little bit if you're not familiar with this. And you can use the check quota command to see how much of your home directory or any other project space that you own, how much of that space you've used. So you can check your storage space quota. Check qconfig. It's a very useful command. It will tell you how many jobs you can have running at any given time. And that number varies from time to time, depending on the level of activity on the cluster. But that's the command you'll use to see how many of what type of jobs you can run at any time. That list of all the hardware that I showed you in the Palmetto Users Guide, there's a text-only version of it available here. If you just look at /etc/hardware table, that's the same information. It shows all the hardware configurations of the compute nodes on the cluster. And of course, it's a very important message. Do not run jobs on the user login. And that's where I'm currently logged in. When you first log into Palmetto, you're logged into the user node, and that's called user 001. From user 001, you're welcome to compile code and do things like that, but don't run your applications on the user node. Don't run MATLAB or your simulation software on the user node. You should always submit a job and run that kind of software, run those kind of applications in a regular job that's running on the compute nodes, not on this login node. And that's it. That's the message of the day. Please do pay attention to that when you first log in. Okay, if you have a new Palmetto account, or if you're using one of the guest accounts and you haven't been running jobs previously, then you'll need to configure passwordless SSH. This is the first thing you should do with your new Palmetto account. And it's done like this. You run these 3 commands. First, you're going to type ssh-keygen, which means you're going to generate your public and private key pair. And here you're specifying type RSA. So you'll run this first command, and it'll ask you where you want to save the key, and you'll also be asked for a passphrase. Just press enter for those 3 questions. Just accept the defaults. Don't enter a passphrase, and don't enter some alternate location for your keys. Just press enter for those 3 questions. When your keys have been generated, then I want you to cd into the .ssh directory. It's a hidden directory, and when you're there, copy this public key file to a new file called authorized_keys. Once you've followed those 3 steps, you will have configured passwordless SSH. If you mess up this process somehow, you can just do it all again and start over. It's not a problem. In order to test your configuration, what you need to do is log into one of the nodes to see if you're asked for a password. You should not be asked for a password. You can test this by logging into user 1 over again, and I'll do that right now. So you see I'm currently logged into user 1, and I'll just try logging into user 1 again, and that will test my passwordless SSH configuration. And I was not asked for a password. That means that my passwordless SSH configuration is working. And so I can just exit out of that nested shell, get back to where I was. All right, so that's passwordless SSH. You need passwordless SSH configured so that when you submit a job, you're not asked for a password every time your job tries to access a compute node in order to run. This is the only way that we can have you log into the compute nodes without being asked for a password every time. So this is a very important step for configuring your account.